Thank you, Scott. And yeah, as I just mentioned, we're going to be doing this. We have a level 1 and level 2 work group on intimacy skills and healthy sexuality. Level 1 is the intimacy skills. That's required to take part 2. And that is a 6-week work group, like all our work groups. It'll start Monday, July 10th. And I wanted to just give you a kind of a little preview of some of the content there. And we talk about intimacy and kind of what is intimacy. And I think just the word itself kind of shakes people up a little bit because it's such a big concept, such an important concept, but we often don't even know kind of what it all breaks down to. So we've broken it down into 7 kind of component parts. And I want to just really run through those quickly. Although the work on these parts is not quick. This takes a lot of therapy and work and communication and trust and so on. But let me run down these 7 parts. The first is knowledge. And most of this is self-knowledge. You know, addicts grow up really not having a lot of trust, not being vulnerable, typically based on our backgrounds. And so the idea of knowing my shadows, knowing my buttons, knowing my dark side, knowing my denial, knowing how I gaslight myself, in addition to my spouse, is going to be really important. So that knowledge is critical. And it's, you know, one of the things we always talk about at Seeking Integrity is people remaining teachable. And we're often, as addicts, not teachable till we're in that kind of end stage of the addictive cycle where we've acted out and now we're feeling the bubble is broken, at least temporarily. So that all that goes into knowledge in my book, and that's a really essential skill for intimacy. The second one is an interdependence. And you know, when you think about addicts and partners, they often start to live really separate lives, disconnected. Sometimes for emotional protection, throwing up barriers, walls, a lot of secrets on the addict side, and so. Being responsible, being assertive with one's needs. We do this a lot at Seeking Integrity. We routinely, almost every day, ask the guys, what do you need? These are emotional needs, right? Dependency needs. I need to be cared for. I need connection. I need support. I need to laugh, you know, whatever. But being able to identify that and express it is a critical part of intimacy, because if my partner doesn't know what's going on with me, intimacy starts to take a real hit, obviously. Telling the truth. You know, we talk about that on this webinar a lot. There's a lot of, you know, lying behaviors that addicts do routinely. And as Scott and I have said, that takes a while to clear up. It doesn't happen day one because it's a habit, but it can be broken, and we expect it to be broken. But telling the truth, being a good listener, you know, all these I think are what I would classify as interdependence. Is how do I communicate? How do I interact with you at an intimate level? The third one is care. You know, and that gets into compassion and empathy, which is a big focus of this work group. And this is one of the things we hear from partners, one of the things we hear from addicts, is that what is intimacy? I just don't know how to do it. And I think, and I relate to that myself, because I think somehow I missed that week of lectures on life. You know, I didn't know how to do it until I got in recovery and actually went to school to become a therapist. I got a lot better at it. But we talk about compassion and empathy, being literally the ability to feel what someone else is feeling. And an addict, by the very nature of definition of an addiction, they're cut off from that. They're cut off from their own feelings, let alone somebody else. And so as we awaken inside, and I'm speaking as a recovering addict, we start to feel what's going on, and that gives us a map or a vocabulary to identify with somebody else, with our partner, or anybody we have empathy with. And so that's a really important point. But we talk about the idea of 2 kinds of empathy. One, cognitive empathy, which is really where people start. That simply means I know I should be feeling. I know I should be feeling bad. I know he or she must be feeling sad or lonely or abandoned or angry. You know, that's all empathy, but I'm using my brain to figure it out. I'm not really feeling it. But what we found is that cognitive empathy, that's a really important first step toward actually developing the real deal. And so practicing that, learning how to open those doors to communicate. And actually, partners may not like this, but I tell my addict clients in recovery, you know, if you're trying to learn empathy, ask, take a guess. Like, I imagine you might be feeling sad or angry or lonely, afraid. And is that right? And I believe that's okay to check out. A lot of partners think we should all be mind readers, and no, but I think so. Give your addict who's trying a break if you can, because that's an important first step. And the second one, of course, is felt empathy, right? I'm feeling it. I'm feeling your pain, literally. And that's where we want to get to. And that's where a lot of people can get to, unless they're, you know, antisocial, which we have very few of, and running through our program at least. The fourth thing is trust. You know, I mentioned earlier, due to the backgrounds of most addicts and frankly most partners, we grow up in situations with maybe trauma, adverse experiences, whatever, where trust is not exactly part of our main wiring, right? So we don't learn how to trust people. We don't learn how to be vulnerable with other people, and we kind of protect ourselves. The minute we start doing that, we're impairing our ability to have empathy and intimacy, because we're not being able to feel, we're not being able to communicate, we're not being able to connect. And so really the first step in building intimacy is learning how to be vulnerable, how to trust, how to open up a little bit, take a risk. And we do this again in group. A lot of the guys, we ask them, tell us the secret you're going to take to the grave. And it's very healthy and relieving to be able to express it, get out in the air, because we imagine how people are going to react, and it's not how people actually react. So that trust is important. Responsiveness, and this is simply awareness outside ourselves. This is where the narcissistic view of a sex addict, the self-centeredness really comes out. We're wrapped up in our own world. And so I think an essential part of intimacy is to be responsive, to understand, to feel and observe what my partner might want, and then to respond to that, to be there, to show up consistently. And in recovery, consistency is the name of the game, right? We can't do it once, we can't do it twice. We need to do it every day. We need to be predictable. I think, as Dr. Rob says, just this side of boring, right? We want to have a routine. We want to be showing up and responsive as we can. And that goes back to this idea of being a good listener. And sometimes being a good listener just means shutting up and listening, reinforcing, not offering solutions, not offering to fix it, but just witnessing what somebody's saying. Couple more, mutuality. This is another important, just a mind shift. By that, I mean moving from me to we. And it's a subtle shift, but it's important to start working as a team with my partner, so that we are a we. We solve problems together. I don't have to do it myself. They don't have to do it themselves. We can do it as a team. And that's a whole shift that a lot of people haven't done. A lot of people are uncomfortable with. A lot of partners are uncomfortable with, like, letting this person in too much because of irresponsibility and things in the background. So this takes time. I understand that. But that mutuality is really important. Obviously we don't want to get enmeshed. We don't want to be flooded, but we want to find that kind of perfect spot where we can be close enough that we're connected and not overly so. And then finally, commitment. It's probably the most important for last, right? But this commitment, the idea of long haul, the idea that we need to repair, the idea that this isn't going to happen overnight, that I am here, I'm going to show up, I'm going to do the work. I'm not going to run. I'm not going to be abandoned. I'm not going to abandon you. And so I think that ability to just show up and be here in the here and now. Addicts, and speaking as an addict, we don't tolerate discomfort very well, and sex addicts don't tolerate boredom well. And there's a lot of novelty seeking, and don't want to be around for negative feelings or feelings at all. We need to really stick to it and show up and really be there in a way that can help give intimacy a chance, right, to develop with that commitment over time. And that is what gives the depth to all these other skills that I've been talking about. So anyway, that's a really quick rundown of some of the stuff we talk about in this work group. It's really practical, skills-based things that are really valuable. So if you're interested, I hope to see you Monday night. I'll be teaching myself. I'm really excited about it. Thank you.
About that, I was just popping the info for people who want to sign up to the work group. I was just popping that up into the chat feature. Looks like the Q&A is coming in. Great. Yeah, real quick, I just wanted to comment on a couple of those before we jump into the Q&A. And type your questions into the Q&A. We can get to a lot of them over the course of an hour. I've sometimes watched like HGTV, the home shopping shows, and I notice a pattern. About half the couples, and usually they're long-term and married, married for a long time, and they talk about our house, our this, we are looking. And then there's the other couples that are usually a second marriage, and invariably the guy talks about everything as me and my, and my kids, my house, my money, my. And I just think, oh dear, this isn't going to work. And I was noticing this long before I started doing this work, and it always bothered me. And now I kind of know why. There is no mutuality. It's a me and a you.
Right, exactly. And you know, that mindset of me and you is really a consequence of addiction too. That does happen, right? Out of safety, emotional safety, we put up barriers and walls. So it's really important for both parties, if you want to repair and get intimacy going, to really, you know, that issue of trust, vulnerability, but that subtle mind shift of, yeah, it's not just me in this, it's us. So yeah, important. You're right. Now that you pointed that out on those shows, I do have.
And now, once you're
I didn't
aware of
connect
it,
the
you
dots.
can't help but notice it. It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
no, for sure.
your relationship is maybe not doomed, but it's
Right.
you got some work to do. You know, the other one, number 5 on your list was responsiveness. Show up, listen, be present. And I talk about being present. You know, when I teach work groups for addicts new to recovery, and you know, for sex addicts and porn addicts, David teaches sort of next level stuff, like how to get your intimacy back. And I talk to them all the time about one of the consequences of the addiction is we're not present. And the example I give is Christmas Eve 1999, right at the very end of my addiction, thank goodness. But I lived about an hour from my sister. My parents lived half a country away, so they were flying out. I'm driving down. My sister has a new baby and a toddler. We're going to do Christmas Eve, and you know, Christmas Day, and there. I didn't, you know, I had forgotten about this until about 5 or 6 years ago. My mother sent me a shoebox full of pictures, and one of the sleeves of pictures was from this Christmas, and the whole event from my arrival to, and there's much more to this story. I won't go into the long version of it, but I'm just not there. I mean, I can see in my eyes that I am not present for this joyous event. You know, with like, you know, a child who's now old enough to understand Christmas, you know, presents, Rudolph, woo, you know, and a new baby and parents flying across. It should have been a joyful family event. And I robbed not only myself of it, but I robbed my family of, you know, my presence. And yeah, that was one of the hardest things for me to do in my recovery has been learning to be present with other people, particularly when the other people are maybe not in the best of moods. But even when they're in a festive mood, it's very hard for me sometimes. It almost, even now, 20 years later. So that's pretty common, right, David?
Very. And I was going to say, I think it's also not unusual for people who grow up to be addicts to have been kind of disconnected their whole lives, right?
Oh, yeah.
And because I know that's certainly true for me, and it sounds like for you. And a lot of our clients, you know, that ability to like dissociate or step out of themselves or disconnect is like second nature because we've been doing it all our lives. So I think that ability to show up is certainly aggravated by the addiction, but I think that's our MO long before we ever pick up a drug.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was an emotional cold fish from childhood for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Let's jump into the Q&A here. Type your questions into the Q&A. We can get to, like I said, we can get to quite a few of these by the end of the hour. How long does an addict of 40 plus years need to work to be able to have empathy and compassion and understanding? I have a real problem with this. We always get this question when we talk about empathy. How long?
Yeah, well, it doesn't take 40 years, I'll tell you that. So I think, you know, it varies, obviously, but I really think if somebody's doing recovery and really working their program and doing the work with the therapist and go through the disclosure process and try to heal the relationship, make that commitment, I think reasonably within a year or two, you could be really at least practicing the skills at a really proficient level. And these are skills, right? This is not an inherent trait. It's not something you're born with. It's not something that other people can do, but you can't. You know, it's a matter of just learning how to do it. And so like any skill, like we have to practice. It takes time. We run into barriers like, you know, old resentments or an inability to listen or self-centeredness that we've had all our lives. You know, all those things can be little impediments. But once we get to know the lay of the land of us, we can start to work around it. So I think if you actively practice these things, and that's why we did this work group, honestly, because where do you learn this stuff? I didn't learn it anywhere. I didn't know how to do it. I think most addicts don't. And so we're offering this just as the skills. And I'll make the point again, it's just a skills-based issue. And so the more you practice, the sooner it'll be. But I think certainly within a year, you can be fairly good. And within 2 years, you could be polished, I would say. And that's probably a long game for this. I think you do it shorter.
And I will add that cognitive empathy definitely comes first. For men tend to be really good at physical empathy. Like if somebody gets hurt, Joe Theismann's leg, for those of us who are old enough to remember the football injury that they showed on TV 1,000 times, we all would grab our leg every time it came on TV. And even now, I want to grab my leg just talking about it. We're good at that, but we struggle with emotional empathy. But we can get to cognitive empathy. The felt empathy for me, it was in year 2 of my recovery. I was doing cognitive empathy before that, but I remember I was in a 12-step meeting and something good had happened to them and they were sharing it and they were and I was excited with them. I was like, oh my God, I don't even know this person. No, I'm sharing their feelings. Oh, this is empathy. Oh my goodness, here it is. Wasn't even trying.
Yeah.
So it does happen, and it's kind of surprising when it does a little bit, because it's like, oh, this is new. but
again, I think this is not something that we lost when we became addicts. It's something we haven't had.
I don't think I ever had empathy.
Yeah, and so it's a new experience in that way, and you have the joy of that, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably said some people probably have empathy, and then addiction hides it or covers it up. But some of them never had it. Yeah. Okay, next one. My sex addict husband did his disclosure a month ago. Then I decided to disclose therapeutically, so good for you, that I had an affair over 20 years ago before we were married. I had a fling with my affair partner 6 months after getting married. I had so much guilt and shame that I did that. I've never thought of or had another affair since then. My husband is questioning me with probing questions that I don't remember from that long ago. I asked him what he is really wanting to know. He said he wants security. I told him action speaks louder than words, and that hopefully, knowing I haven't done anything or even wanted to look outside our marriage in over 20 years, would show how committed I am. I think he thinks I lack empathy and don't understand that he's hurting. How can I demonstrate that I understand that he's hurting and that I have been and am still loyal to him?
What an interesting turning of the tables. Because we're getting all sides here with the addict now also understanding and feeling how it feels with that old betrayal, and kudos to this writer for the way they handled this. I was perfect with the therapeutic part and discussing it, and the concern to try to make this to put this in the past. So I think to answer your question, I think communication, listening, speaking, that we have one of the essential skills we talk about in building intimacy and empathy is active listening. And active listening simply means being connected to the speaker, giving them a chance, not interrupting, not making it about me as the listener, but really listening to you. A good active listener does things even a therapist does, lean forward if you're interested, or kind of mimic body language. If they do like this, you could do that too, but it's a subtle body language way of showing you're connected. You can paraphrase, oh, so you said you left home at 8 or whatever, but these are little clues to the speaker that they're being heard. The one thing about active listening that's really important is to let the person be heard and then not try to fix it, not try to judge it, not try to give an answer. But I would, and this is great practice for any couple, by the way, especially when it's in sensitive areas like this. There's an Imago dialogue, probably a lot of people are familiar with, but one of the steps of it is mirroring, meaning, so if my partner says something to me, before I respond, I have to literally parrot back what I just heard. And you'd be surprised in a couple dynamic when there's tension or high emotions, how much miscommunication there is. That is not what I said. You didn't hear what I said. I said boom, boom, boom. So just little techniques like that, which I also realize we cover in this work group, are really important because it shows it gives you guys a chance to connect and communicate. And just as we say to the partners, normally, this is here, the tables are kind of turn a little bit, it's going to take time and it's going to take consistency. And frankly, to the person posing this question, this is 20 years ago. You've done this with all the integrity that I can imagine being necessary. So to me, I think it's up to the addict now to hear and listen and deal with his feelings and hurt or whatever, and they're legitimate. He should deal with that. But I don't know that there's anything more that you, the person writing the question, can do here, except be open and connected.
Yeah, and for the addicts, because we've had variations of this question, and sometimes it comes from the addict. We need the addict needs to make sure he is not using this as a defense mechanism or an excuse or a shield or a weapon or, you know, I mean, sex addicts, when we disclose, we usually, you know, we get discovered, we get caught, you know, we don't do it willingly, you know, we tell you only what you already know. And then we do a formal therapeutic disclosure after several months of therapy to help us get to the truth, you know, usually we'll come clean, but we're not so graceful and gracious as to say, you know what, I feel like I need to tell you something, because you could have kept that secret. You did the right thing by coming clean, but you know, if the addict is listening, and I hope you are, this is not a weapon for you. This is not an excuse for you to not do your work. Yes, you have some extra work because you are also now a betrayed partner and you're going to have to work through that. But hopefully that will help you have some empathy for what you've done to your wife. And, you know, so yeah, I mean, anything to add to that, David? I just always worry in these situations like, yeah, but you did this.
I know, I agree. The tit for tat kind of stuff. No, that's a really good warning. But
yeah,
I just going back to, I guess, the core of this question is like, my husband says I don't have empathy. I mean, this whole question, the way it's worded, is full of empathy and trying to do, you know, be connected. So I guess I would, if one final word on this, if you guys aren't doing any kind of daily check-in, like a Thanos or something, I'd really recommend that, because that also gives you an opportunity to express and to check in with how somebody's feeling. And that also shows connection and integrity, really. So I would just keep doing what you're doing and keep communicating. That's going to be the key.
And please understand that neither David nor I are saying to the addict that he should not feel a sense of betrayal.
Oh God, yeah.
I mean, that's you know that's perfectly normal and reasonable thing to feel. Just don't turn it into a weapon, please. Yeah. Hi, I'm a porn addict about 8.5 months post D-Day. I've maintained my sobriety since that time. Awesome. I have weekly individual and group therapy with the CSAT. I attend 12-step meetings daily, and I'm actively working the steps with my sponsor, currently on step 4. I'm struggling with negative self-perception and not liking myself. How do I become comfortable enough in my own skin to be able to stay grounded when communicating with my wife and not going into shame? Great question. You're muted, David.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Yeah, great question. There's a lot of stuff in here. I was trying to figure out which angle to take. But first of all, I just want to congratulate you on doing everything you're doing. This is exactly what people ask. And, you know, the 4th step is a tricky one, right? A lot of people trip over the 4th step a little bit or delay it or defer it. I did the delay strategy myself for a while till my sponsor wouldn't let me push it off anymore in the future. But it's a painful thing because it's really, sometimes for the first time in our lives, we're looking at ourselves. And so shame, you know, is the central feature of any sex addict, any porn addict, probably any addict, honestly. And shame is something that, again, is a long, old friend of ours. We all have shame for a long time. So I'm sorry you're feeling it, but I'm not surprised you're feeling it. I think what I would try to do here, I have often found the shame, the negative beliefs about oneself, we learn that, right? Or it's taught to us, more correctly, taught to us by, you know, dysfunctional homes or parents or teachers or the law. Or, you know, society imposes sometimes things on us, and parents sometimes do as well, in the form of abuse, sometimes even physical or emotional. So the shame comes from somewhere. In my book, shame does not, no baby's born with shame. It doesn't belong to us, really. It was kind of thrown on us, so we have to release it. And I think that's a really essential task for the addict to do. And a lot of that release of shame is doing exactly what you're doing, which is the 4th step and the 5th step and those middle steps, right, all the way up to making amends. That's a really important piece for there. I also found that shame is often connected to lying, because we misinform the world about what's going on inside us because we're ashamed of it. And so I think all these things are really important to connect the dots, with shame being a really central feature. Finally, I'll just say we have what I call negative core beliefs that everybody has. These are conclusions, I am or I am not kind of statements that we draw there, and they're old from like childhood. But I'm unsafe, I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy. No one understands me. I'm all alone. Those kind of things just operate in the background and really start to undermine our self-esteem. So if did you say you're seeing a CSAT? I think yeah, you are. I would ask your CSAT about working on some of these negative core beliefs. And it may be affirmations. Sometimes we have to it takes a therapeutic session to say, well, if one of mine is I'm unworthy, so maybe it takes a session with a therapist. So let's do a reality check on that. Where did that come from? What's it about? What's the evidence? And just kind of blow it apart, basically. So I think a lot of that work, that internal work, in addition to your step work, I think it'll largely take care of itself. But I think to just constantly be conscious of releasing shame, because that's going to be it's like a long, slow exhale. You want to get rid of that stuff from within you, and that'll clear up a lot of this. I think a lot of the confusion.
Yeah, one of the things that really helped me with shame, and you are doing the step work, is working the 12 steps. Step 4, for those who don't know, is a searching fearless moral inventory. If there's one that's going to shame you, it's that one, which is why a lot of people, put it off, because it's just too difficult. For me, that was the step that was the big change in my recovery, for a lot of reasons. So it was a powerful one for me. Step 4 is the searching and fearless moral inventory. 5 and 6, we identify our character defects. I don't particularly like that term, but things we need to work on. And we start the process of working on them. Or 5, we share our step 4, and then 6 and 7, we work on the character defects. 8 and 9, we identify people we need to make amends to, and then we make the amends. So this is the beginning of identifying, in a searching fearless moral inventory, it's not all about bad stuff. We also look at the good stuff. So it's kind of a reality check. And then we start figuring out what we need to work on to get right with ourselves and to feel comfortable in our own skin, which you mentioned. And then 8 and 9 is getting right with the world. Step 10 keeps us right with the world. At 11 and 12, it gets us outside of ourselves and encourages us to help other people. But steps 4 through 9, you're on the beginning of what for me was being able to feel comfortable in my own skin. That's a term I use all the time. And to not be so shame-based, and yeah.
Yeah, that kind of transition that these steps enable really is I think the key. There's a lot of language in the big book about transformations, right? And transformational. I think that's these middle steps and that inventory at the beginning of it is really where we start to really change kind of the way we're built into something else, a better version by far. So yeah.
And the best results that people experience in recovery come from a combination of therapy, 12-step work, support groups like this one, webinars, education. The more we do, the more it's sort of, I think most of it is mutually reinforcing in a lot of ways, just from different angles. But I find step work almost essential. So I'm glad you're doing it.
Great.
What do I do when my wife's whole attitude changes when I attend these meetings? It's like she gets mad at me because maybe it triggers her. Also, I asked her if this is 2 questions, so let's just stop at that one. Let's just stop right there. So The wife seems to be emotionally triggered by the addict coming to a meeting for his recovery. Is that something that happens a lot, and how can that be addressed?
Yeah, no, I think that is not unusual because it's a reminder, even though, it's a recovery-based activity. Like sometimes it can be triggering for the partner really out of trauma. This is a trauma response of being very upset about things that are associated with the acting out. And so it's not uncommon for sure. I think, talk about it. These are the kinds of things that are important to talk about. The problem, did you say she yells, she gets mad? I'm not sure what that looks like, but sometimes also, we not only as addicts bring a lot of our own trauma with us, but partners have trauma as well, right? And so oftentimes these situations, what we're seeing, the reaction is maybe bigger than the situation would seem to call for. And that's often because it's being fueled by old issues that never quite got resolved. It could be trauma or other kinds of betrayals or whatever. So you're getting a reaction, a trauma response that's a little out of sync with going to a recovery meeting. But I think that says more about the work your partner has to do, or your wife, in terms of dealing with her trauma. So yeah, I think I don't let that discourage you from coming here. I think the best, again, seems to be the theme tonight, is to talk about it, see what you can do to make her more comfortable when you come to these meetings. And I know at some level, of course, she understands this is a good thing for you, but it's almost, that's why I think this is old strands of memories and old traumas maybe informing this particular response that she's getting. But I really keep the communication lines open.
Yeah, and there's research. I mean, betrayed partners almost always behave as if they have PTSD in the early part of your recovery, whether they actually have PTSD or not. If it sticks around long enough, then they do. But this is normal. Things will trigger them, and they will get very emotional for reasons that don't make sense to you, and that's okay. That is actually normal for betrayed partners. And as David said, the fact that you're coming to a recovery meeting almost certainly reminds her of why you need to come to a recovery meeting. And boom, she's in the pain again. And I think David kind of wondered the same thing. What is she doing to get support for herself? A lot of times betrayed partners will say, well, I'm not the one with the problem. Why should I go to therapy? Why should I go to meetings? And the answer is, you're right. You're not the one with the problem, but you're certainly impacted by it, and you deserve some support. So we offer tons of free support and low-cost support for betrayed partners. We have online work groups that are low cost, and sessions like this that are specifically for betrayed partners. I hope she is taking advantage of that. But I'm going to ask David this question. So let's say the betrayed partner is not getting any help, and the addict wants to make her aware that that help is available. Is there a way to go about that without pissing her off even more?
Yeah, because you're opening the door. This is your problem. Situation. You need help, right? That's the old codependence model in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, again, just if you can start with that mindset of like me to we, okay, this is us, this is our relationship. We're trying to fix this. We're trying to heal this. I understand you're in a lot of pain. I'm doing the work I need to do. I think you would find comfort in getting support for yourself as well. Something like that. I think you don't want to pathologize, you don't want to blame. No. But it's important. And, you can do it also. One of the things Scott and I have talked about a lot is like, when you do X, it makes me feel. So when you berate my support meetings or get angry when I go, it makes me feel sad. It makes me feel scared. And I think some vulnerability on how you're feeling with this. That's a much better way to connect with somebody and get under the skin than saying, I think you need to X, Y, Z. Just gosh, when you're acting like this and you get mad, it makes me really sad and a little bit afraid. And that's much more relatable, I think, to a person. They can hear that much more easily. Yeah.
So, okay. So the second part of this question, which is a totally separate question, I asked her if we could be intimate the other night. Granted, I'm 112 days sober. She said that this is too early in my recovery. So I'm just going to let you run with that, David.
Okay, well, couple thoughts. 100, we do recommend a period of abstinence, just let the brain kind of shift. That varies. There's no magic number. So sometimes it's 90 days, sometimes it's longer. So, but granted, that's probably fairly early. What I'm reading into this, it's too early for her. First of all, to maybe be that vulnerable, have that much trust. And she may have some insight that I don't in terms of just how you're acting and that she feels, at least in her opinion, you may not ready for that. But what I'm hearing really is that she's not ready for that as well. What I might suggest, and I don't know what you mean by intimate, but one thing that often works at some point to reconnect is not so much sex per se, but touch, hugging, cuddling, stroking, massage, just reconnecting with touch. And I think that's, and we'll cover that in the second work group, the healthy sex work group. But that's important too, because sometimes, connected sex is just too intense and too much. Because if she's getting mad at you're going to support group, I imagine that would really open up some feelings of vulnerability, if nothing else, and she's going to be reactive. So I hear her putting a sign up or a sign, holding up on it, slow down. But I would also talk about other ways, and you should talk about this her and come to a joint decision, right? Me to we, about how she might feel about reconnecting in other ways, touch, just holding each other, holding hands, whatever. But I think there's alternatives between just the, full-blown insertive sex. There's a lot of stuff, and there's been a lot of studies too. I don't know how old you guys are, but as we get older, touch becomes increasingly more important for intimacy, just touch. And so in all its forms. So just there are other options maybe than what you might be thinking of in terms of reconnecting. But I mean, you have to honor what she's saying, and I would ask her why she thinks that, and just and not accusatory, but just kind of information for you, because it may be helpful to reflect on at least how it is perceived, what's going on.
Yeah, I have some thoughts here too. First of all, the word intimate, the way that David and I use the word intimate, we're talking about emotional connection. We're not really talking about sex. Most men in the planet, I was intimate with my wife last night. That means I had sex last night. But to David and myself, and if you take David's work group, and I strongly encourage you to do so, because I really think it would help you. We're talking about emotional connection. 112 days in is fine for some couples. It's not fine for others. She does not feel safe. You have not re-earned her trust yet. So, I always think, why would I want to have sex with somebody I don't trust? And the follow-up to that is sex is not relationship glue. Sometimes it feels like relationship glue, but it's not. It's not the answer. Emotional intimacy, emotional connection is relationship glue. So, 112 days in for some couples, that would be fine. And for other couples, not so much. And it takes two to tango. I mean, at 200 days, she might be starting to trust you again and be willing to have sex, but you might be like, no, I have more stuff to work on. And you might have to put it off again. We see that sometimes. Initially, the sex addict wants to have sex all the time, thinks that's going to fix everything. And the wife is like, no, no. And then later, the addict is really getting into his work and digging up trauma and resolving old issues, and is not feeling very sexual. And maybe the partner has come around trust-wise and is ready. But both of you need to be ready. And at least right now, she is not ready. And I agree with David. One of the things I know David covers in the second half of the intimacy and sex work group, there's 6 weeks on intimacy, 6 weeks on sex, is working your way up through the ladder, the stages of intimacy. Non-sexual touch, sexual touch, but not sex. Then it's a slow process, and it really starts with the emotional connection. Um, so,
And if we just think about the 7 factors I went over, right, from connectedness and mindset and trust and all those things have to be operating kind of in sync. I think some of those are probably still not there for one or both of you. And so I think that's just going to take time. And I think, and this is normal, by the way. I think this is not the situation. It's very, very common.
Yeah. This is the last question we have. So type a couple more in because we have some time left. When we talk about my addiction, my wife ends up just yelling at me. This scares me because that is the way my abusive stepfather always handled everything. How do I get her to stop? She is not physically abusive. It's a lot packed into this.
Yeah, and this is a really great question because this is something that we get a lot. You know, a lot of the guys we see, I think a lot of addicts in general, have histories that are similar to this, families of origin stuff with at least one parent who yelled or was an alcoholic or something. I was certainly me too. And I know from personal experience, when I was a kid, when my dad would yell, who was a periodic alcoholic and occasionally would come at you, I learned how to kind of disconnect and shut down. And that's what a 5-year-old can do, right? Well, I'm no longer 5 years old, but my midbrain, with what has that trauma response, still comes awake as if there's a fire when somebody else in my life yells at me. So I've become 5 years old again, and I shut down and I can't find the words. And I've had couples where that would the one would have that response, kind of shut down, not find words, kind of deer in the headlights kind of thing, which just enrages the other because they want a reaction, they want a connection, and it just, that's a terrible loop. And it sounds like that's what you guys have gotten into. I think it's important to explain that the reason you're reacting that way, and this is maybe for you to know too, if you don't, it's not just choosing to, it's you're having a trauma response. Your body is disconnecting you to try to preserve itself to keep you safe. And now it's out of context, and then, you know, she's not your stepfather, and it's not productive in this situation, but still that's what your body's doing. And it's the life and death reaction that's going to override everything else. And so the way I think to get out of it is explain what's going on, explain to her, this is history, and I'm responding to this, kind of don't like it, but this is what's happening. The only way I really know to break that cycle then is to disconnect briefly, right? To get out of the space. And that means getting out, going outside, taking a walk, making a call, connecting with nature, you know, doing some deep breathing, just re-regulate yourself. That's a critical skill for every addict to have, is just to, if nature or somebody comes along and just pushes me off emotional center, I need to be able to kind of get back. Now, I don't have to do it by myself. I can call people, I can go to a meeting or whatever, but I need to be able to kind of reestablish that homeostasis. I think that's what I would encourage you to go out and do, but then you've got to come back. Because I think we as addicts, conflict avoidant, typically, you know, we get in that deer in the headlights thing and go away and not come back and finish. So to earn the trust, to keep the integrity of your communication, you're gonna have to come back and finish that. But I think what you can do is put a request, and I'm big on couples requesting things of each other, for it to be conscious of a response, because it's automatically going to create a counter response in you. And so if she can contain herself a little bit, and by the way, frankly, when I hear yelling like that too, that's a trauma response as well. So I would suspect she has her trauma either through the addiction or in the past, because that kind of yelling is also a life and death, like emotional thing. So you guys both have some work to do, but this is a common dynamic. It's a painful one, and I would just and I've seen it escalate, and I've seen it escalate to physical, by the way, too, which is not cool ever. So take care of yourself, let your wife know what you're doing, and then come back and finish the talk once you're re-regulated. But I don't know of a way to kind of count to 10 or, you know, regather yourself without actually disconnecting for a few minutes and coming back.
Yeah. I mean, I can say that I grew up in a house where I had one disconnected parent and one screamer. So both of those responses to me will trigger, you know, will send me back to childhood where, you know, I'm not safe. So and some people, it does feel like if I'm screaming at you, it means I'm trying to connect, and but then I'm pulling away, and there's that push pull. It's the dysfunctional dance. I know that Sue Johnson talks about breaking the pattern. I know that various forms of therapy work on breaking. Imago therapy works on breaking the pattern. Can you describe those a little bit and how they might be applied in a calmer moment to help the couple, learn to dance differently?
Yeah, and I think, we've been talking about skills tonight. I think one of the skills that's so important is to be able to learn how to have heated feelings, including anger and other things, and express those, but express them in at least a relatively constructive way. And I think learning how to fight, learning how to argue, is a really important skill, because I don't know of any marriage that has never had an argument, right? And I've seen some where it's really destructive, where people really take that and weaponize it. And so learning how to talk, learning how to stay present, but there's a couple of skills involved, I think, if we break it down. One is to be present in myself. So I'm not disconnected, I'm not reacting, I'm not 5 years old again, trying to pretend I'm in the situation with my spouse, and because that's not going to work. So I think being able to be present, being able to gather oneself and be here, but also understand and kind of separate out people. When we do role play in therapy or psychodrama or anything like that, when we assign a role, say if somebody's going to play my mother or my father in the group, at the end of it, we de-role, meaning the person says, as part of the closure, so I'm not your mother, I'm David, your friend, or whatever. So, and in a way we have to do that, maybe not so formally, but we have to do that with our spouses as well, and realize and make that connection. They're not our abusive father or yelling mother or whatever. They're our spouse, and they're having feelings, they may be yelling, but this is a different relationship. You're an adult now, you're not a kid. Internal family systems have some nice ways of conceptualizing. There's a lot of therapeutic models that do this, where we look at the parts of us that want to rescue, the parts of us that want to protect, and so on, and just kind of understanding what's happening. But I think it's self-awareness in those moments of really being connected and kind of de-rolling your spouse from whatever, in imago therapy, they call it, that's the imago, it's the image of the good and bad aspects of your parent, which according to imago therapy, that's who we marry. We marry some combination of those traits. But in any case, most of us carry a lot of those childhood dynamics into our spouse, or if anything, we project them onto our spouse, which isn't great for a marriage. So anyway, I think just to be present, to de-roll, to talk it through, stay connected, but not in that heightened emotional state.
Yeah, thank you. And I popped into the chat feature our respectful conflict agreement, which can be helpful with things like that. It's like we agree that it's ground rules for having an argument, basically, in a way that's productive. And the biggest thing is, the one thing I'll pull out of the respectful conflict agreement is, instead of fighting each other, let's identify the problem and fight the problem. We're on the same team. That's very hard to do in the heat of the moment. But I think if you can do it, it's a relationship saver, for sure. Next question here. Oh, go ahead, David.
I just wanted to add, to build on something we said before, talking about that shift from me to we. These are the weak points, those arguments or fights in a relationship where that can break again. So I think just to be conscious of, we're a team. This is us. It's not each other breaking, down the relationship itself.
Yeah. Our next question here is, what is Thanos? Thanos. I called up the article. David's always amazed that I can find these things so quickly, but we have an article with useful check-ins for couples, and I'll pop the link into the chat feature in a second. But I'm going to read you what I think I wrote this. Yeah, I did. So what I wrote about Thanos, but I wrote this after surveying a whole bunch of therapists about the check-ins they like, and Thanos was the most common. Thanos seems to be the simplest and most utilized format for couples check-ins. Thanos is an acronym for feelings, affirmations / appreciations, needs, ownership, struggles / sobriety. One person checks in while the other listens without questions or comments. then the other person checks in the same way. It is important to maintain eye contact while checking in. Generally, Thanos is a daily check-in done at the same time each day, usually in the evening, but not too close to bedtime. Typically, it is better if the addicted partner initiates the check-in as a sign that they're serious about recovery and relationship healing. So Thanos feelings, share what you're feeling at this moment, affirmations / appreciations, affirm your partner for something they have done, needs, state a need you have today, maybe not necessarily a need that you hope your partner will meet, but a need that you have, ownership, take responsibility for something you have said or done that hurt your partner or your relationship, and then struggles / sobriety. Share a struggle you've had since the last check-in. If the addict has struggled with sobriety, this is the time to share it. So feelings, affirmations, needs, ownership, and struggles. Just a basic check-in. There are longer forms of check-ins. There are various other ones. I'm going to pop this into the chat feature. David, do you have any thoughts on regular check-ins for couples? I know you've mentioned communicate several times today. Is this a good way to go about it?
Let me just say on Thanos, then I'll expand it. Thanos, I think one of the protocol guidelines is to run really fast in a couple minutes. And I think there's something to be said for brevity, but I think sometimes things require a longer conversation. But I think the idea of allowing one person to speak and not be interrupted and not be interpreted or comments was really important. So to then expand on communication in general, I think the idea of routine, regular check-ins is critical because we can drift. As a couple, we can drift. And so to check in on a regular basis and, structure, I think is incredibly valuable in recovery, and doing it at the same time or similar times every day, it just, you build it into your day and it starts to ground your day. We've talked here before about grounding and that kind of feeling like we're settled and not kind of free floating in our own lives. And that's one important way to do it. I also know that, and Scott mentioned the eye contact, a lot of times it's very difficult. And, when we talk about shame, which is a critical component of sex addiction, one of the defenses against shame is not having eye contact, looking down. And so really creating eye contact. And I even ask couples I work with to hold hands, which actually kind of locks you in. You can't squirm away. And really, really focus and concentrate. And those general principles, I think, are really important. There's similar skills to active listening, where we're not interrupting, we're not interpreting, we're not judging, we're not stopping, we're just listening, we're witnessing. And then if they want feedback, we can give feedback. But I think that kind of idea of just open communication, really in a connected way, is critical. And this is like all recovery activities. It's not something that works if we do it once or twice. It works if we do it every day, and that's how progress is made. And so, yeah, I think check-ins are incredibly important. And I do like Thanos too myself as a nice, concise way to do it.
Yeah, and the reason I like these standardized check-ins like Thanos or any other form you choose to use is, I'm an addict. I'm really bad at telling you what's going on. I mean, I'm just really bad at it. And I used to be a whole lot worse at it. So having a prompt, like, what am I feeling at this moment? Now, I might have to get my little feelings wheel chart out so I can figure out what I'm feeling at this moment. But at least I know I can do that and then say something nice about you and something I need. And, it gives me some prompts and helps me share with you. David, like a short check-in like this, should there be a conversation after it, or should that be saved for therapy? Or, what happens after a Thanos?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think it kind of depends on what's going on in the home. Normally, I do like a conversation to talk about this afterwards, because usually it's not triggering, but people can be curious about that, or there may be some new information or something they're wondering more about. So I think, yeah, to have the opportunity to talk about it more. Now, I think each couple needs to really use common sense, right? If this is wading into some, minefield of emotional disaster, then obviously I'd table it until you get to your CSAT. But I think generally a conversation can be really useful to follow up.
We are out of questions and we're about out of time. So I think maybe we'll just wrap up for the week. We will be back next week, same time, same place. Please come again and bring your questions with you, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Thanks. And I hope we see some people on July 10th, the work group.
Yes, yes. Anybody who's interested in developing healthy intimacy, particularly male addicts, that's who the work group is for. Definitely sign up for David's group starting next week.
Great. All right. Thanks. Good night.
Yeah.